Paul McCartney is a bit of a legend within the music industry. He was one of the 4 members of the Beatles, and is known to have written quite a few of the Beatles' most famous songs, and he's also known for being a musician who doesn't and can't read sheet music.
I can't read music.
But a couple of years ago, a video was released of Paul McCartney teaching the piano and giving some tips on how to write songs, and in today's video, I'm going to react to it. So, let's get into it.
You know, I meet a lot of young groups, and I say, I can't read music or write it. They go, what? And it's like, well, that doesn't work. Well, if you've done this, how could you do it without? But it means that it's here. It's not on a bit of paper.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that a lot of people think that reading sheet music is the only way to learn an instrument, and it's not. Obviously, as a composer and a pop songwriter, sheet music is the best way of writing those ideas down so that you can see them and so that you can give them to other musicians to play. But actually, quite a lot of music is just about pattern recognition. If you know what a scale is and you know what chords are and how to construct chords, then you can actually get quite far with music, especially if you're writing your own music.
I tell kids who want to learn the piano, I say, okay, here's you go. Start with middle C. We all know that. That's the first thing in a piano lesson. And then think about like the Eddie Cochran thing. I say, well, that's a chord if you play those together. And you just got that, remember this and that.
Yeah, so the chord he's actually playing is a C major chord, which is the notes C, E, and G. And the good thing about a C major chord is that it's chord number 1 in a C major scale, which is just the white notes. So if you play chords using just the white notes in that particular hand shape, so every other note, then you are playing chords from a C major scale, and you can write lots and lots of songs using just those chords. I would advise, however, not to use those 3 fingers like Paul McCartney suggests. Normally, for just standard chord shapes like that, you use your thumb, middle finger, and little finger. And a very good example of that is the song Let It Be, which Paul McCartney wrote for the Beatles, and that is just the chord C, then G with that same shape, then A with the same shape, and then F with that same shape. Although a lot of pop songs use the same chords and they're quite simple, they're just this simple shape, the make or break of a pop song tends to be how those chords relate to the melody and whether a melody is memorable. And Paul McCartney was very, very good at writing very memorable melodies that are super catchy.
So you do that, 1 space, finger, 1 space, finger. So there you got the chord. I say, you know, we started there. And so you could kind of write a song with that. Yeah. But if you just move this up 1, it's the same shape. Yeah. You've got another chord. Yeah. So now you got 2 chords. You move it up again, you got 3 chords. Yeah. And move it up again, you got 4 chords. Yeah. And then again you got 5. And then now you got 6. Well, you don't need more than that. Yeah. So you can now put permutations of that, and you get songs. You know, like. It's that same little shape. Yeah. But that shape is a marvelous shape. You can do anything with that shape. You know.
Yeah, and it's interesting because for a lot of musicians, even just doing that is really quite difficult. Coming up with a melody that fits with the chords that you're playing is quite hard. And also, Paul McCartney obviously has a natural instinct for what chords sound good together. So he knows that doing a 4-bar phrase in music sounds good, and repeating chords over and over again sounds good. And for anyone that wants to get into writing music, a lot of it is just playing around with the piano and doing exactly what Paul McCartney did to learn, which is just finding shapes and ideas that you like on the piano and then playing with them and stretching them and see when they break.
Did your dad teach you that shape?
No, we figured that out from. We had to know this to do Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yeah.
Oh, baby, whole lot of shake, move on. Yeah. So once
Yeah, it's interesting. So rock and roll and blues are kind of very similar genres to each other because they use a lot of chord 1, 4, and 5. So in the key of C major, chord 1 is C, chord 4 is F, and chord 5 is G. And a lot of blues, so like the 12-bar blues, for example, just uses those 3 chords, and the same with rock and roll. So for Paul McCartney, who grew up in that era, a lot of the music he listened to will have been using those same patterns over and over again. So the more songs he played around with and learned, the more he will have seen chord 1, 4, and 5 in literally everything. And then you kind of just learn via osmosis.
Figure that. So it really gets super fascinating, I think.
Absolutely.
You know, you've got all the chords you can play with, put those in permutations, then mess with the bass notes. Obvious thing to do is to do the note 1 octave down that relates to that chord. But you can do.
The thing is with the piano is, and it's why I started learning the piano, is that you can kind of do all of the instruments that you would play in a band or an orchestra, all just with 2 hands and on your own. And I think not enough songwriters think in terms of instruments. So when you're writing a song, most songs have some form of bass line, they have some kind of harmony in the middle, and they have a melody sitting on top. And then those notes are played in some kind of rhythm, or you have a percussion instrument like a drum kit alongside the instruments. And if you think of songwriting in this way, it actually makes writing kind of a lot easier because you can break it down into component parts and build it back up again. And once again, Paul McCartney is kind of naturally doing this. He will play a chord, he'll add a moving bass line, and he'll sing a melody over the top. And that's kind of 3 of the parts. And as with the chord that he played at the beginning where he went, he's already thinking kind of about what rhythm he's going to play these notes in. So if you just take one chord like a C major chord, you could play it like this, and that would be 1 element. Then you could add a bass line. Then you could add a rhythm. And then all it takes is adding a melody to that, and you've kind of written the verse of a song based on 1 chord. And you can kind of hear this in a lot of the Beatles songs. They're very clearly structured so that you have like some chords, a bass line, and a melody.
Harmony.
You're getting really dramatic now.
Yeah.
And I think that's all we ever did, just experimented.
Yeah, once again, another thing that a lot of people don't actually think about, not only when they're playing their own songs, but when they're playing other people's pieces of music. And it's one of the things that a lot of learning pianists never really think about as much as they should. And that is, what do the notes mean, and what do the change in notes mean? If something is ascending like that, how does that affect how the music feels? If it's descending, how does it affect how the music feels? If it's thinner, how does that feel? And if it's thicker, how does that feel? The interesting thing about music is literally everything that you play can feel a certain way depending on how you play it. So once again, you could just take that C major chord and you can play it like this. And that sounds kind of weak and thin textured and kind of simple. But you could also play that same chord like this, which is exactly the same notes, and that sounds deeper and warmer, or like this. And that sounds thin and almost innocent. When you are writing a piece of music, you literally have all of these options for every single chord you choose. And the art in music is trying to get what you play to represent what you want the song to mean.
John doing it, imagine. You can hear that's him.
Yeah.
It's just sort of what we'd learned based on that.
Yeah.
I saw John Legend the other night, and John's doing this.
Yeah, the interesting thing with Imagine is that it doesn't really theoretically make a lot of sense. You've got kind of C major, and then F major, but then this line here, having A, B flat, B, those chromatic notes, chromatic just means every single note, It doesn't really make too much sense. The only reason it works is because they're consecutive notes and our ear can follow it consecutively. But the actual chords for the song are quite simple. It's just a C chord, so exactly the same C major chord, and an F chord. And it doesn't really need to be more complicated than finding simple chords that you like and then adding in sort of little melodic licks like that sound interesting.
Forget what the song was, and then he sort of goes. But that's those.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, if you put some nice soul stuff over that, I got pain, I got my pain in my heart. You know, da, 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 da. Our favorite.
Yeah, so literally every pop song in the pop charts, especially if it's containing the piano, like Adele, like John Legend, it's all going to be really simple chords, and it is going to be these triads, these 3-note chords that you can make playing every other note in a scale. What makes each of these songs sound unique from one another is the melody, the structure, the instrumentation, and then how you play those chords on the instruments. But the actual chords themselves aren't difficult.
Composer was Bach in the Beatles because it was nearest to what we were doing. And we always used to say, just put a beat behind it.
Yeah.
Be better.
Yeah.
It'd be better, man.
Yeah.
What I liked about it was the mathematical thing, so that you kind of go.
That is really interesting, because I would say the exact opposite of that. So Bach used a lot of contrapuntal writing, and that is where you kind of have interweaving melodies, and you have harmonies changing on literally every note, and it gets very, very complicated very fast. For example, in a Bach fugue, you have a melody that starts, and then you have another voice that plays that same melody overlapping the previous one slightly later. And that happens 2, 3, 4 times, and it gets very, very complicated trying to work out exactly what's going on. And although sometimes the chords that are being used can be seen as quite simple, a lot of the time they're also not very simple. So where I would say with the Beatles, they have 3, 4, 5 chords happening that repeat over and over again with a melody over the top. That's something called a homophonic texture, where you have chords and a melody. In Bach, a lot of the time, it's a polyphonic texture, where you've got different melodies interweaving, and you've got harmonies changing sort of every note.
Well, Eleanor Rigby. You do that. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you found out this is what they were doing. 1, 2, and then... you know, so you put those together, and then on top of it, you might put. So you've got, like, you know, 2 or 4 or 8.
Yeah.
Very
in
simple
the same space.
mathematics.
Yeah.
It's all happening together, so it gives this lovely feel of something satisfying.
Yeah, and nothing has really changed since the Beatles. Most of pop songs now are just using electronic instruments rather than a band. But the concepts are the same. The chords that are being used are exactly the same. The way of writing and making things interesting is exactly the same. And it is the way that you formulate the rhythm, the texture, and the instrumentation, which largely determines how that music is going to feel, as well as the chord you've chosen to use itself. For example, if you choose a major chord or a minor chord, it's going to sound different. So if you aspire to be able to write pieces of music, then go and do it and reverse engineer what you've done, like Paul McCartney did, when he worked out that a lot of songs were using this shape, and now he knows what that shape is and how to use it. And all it is working out what those patterns are, why those patterns work, and why you like the pattern. And then if you accumulate enough patterns, you're able to play and write a lot of interesting music. If you want some more advice on playing the piano, then check out this video where I tell you what I've learned over the 8,498 days that I've been playing. So if you are interested in that, then head on through and I will see you there.